Welcome to book club number 2. Dr. Miller with a book that I think you're going to find valuable, especially if you are in the field of strength conditioning and working with high-level athletes. So this is the book, by the way. Subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see some of the other book club. I've got books coming up that I'm reading. That's what this book club is all about. It's nested inside my channel, so I'm talking about different books that I'm reading currently and give you an idea if there might be something that's worth your time looking at. So we'll just kind of briefly discuss the contents and again who the book might be for. So this book is from Ultimate Athlete Concepts. I think it's $25. It's called Developing Explosive Athletes by Dr. Bryan Mann. Now, first of all, the book's not very big, but it doesn't need to be because it's an applied book. I think it's important to understand who Dr. Mann is first. Dr. Mann is one of those few professionals that obviously has his doctorate. He's in the academic side and very comfortable there, but also a coach. So he's still coaching from what I understand. He was at the University of Missouri for most of his time. I think he still might be there. And so here's a man that is a coach that's doing both worlds. And again, that's a unique thing to find. Ultimate Athlete Concepts has authors like that. I would highly recommend looking at those type of authors because they have that unique perspective. Not to say one or the other isn't bad, but if you're a coach looking for the academic kind of flavor, right, you need that part maybe a little bit weaker. That's a good thing. If you're an academic and you need to understand coaching and the application of coaching, a professional again like Dr. Mann's a great bridge. So I highly recommend. I've read some of his articles in the past. He is definitely interested in autoregulation, and I'll explain that in a second. So I have a video on autoregulation, by the way. You might want to check that out. But the book is all about this velocity-based training, which is a new approach. It's not, it's new in the last few years, mostly because technology has got to the point where we can actually do it. But the idea behind velocity-based training is based upon autoregulation, meaning instead of forcing a load on an athlete, so an athlete, you might tell them to do a set of 5 at 85%, which would be pretty tough, and they just have to do it, right? And they may get crushed, they may do really well, right? But what if they had a bad night last night and they broke up with their girlfriend or boyfriend and they didn't eat lunch before they came and trained, right? The 85% is now 93% or 95%. And so the load, what they're doing is just accumulating fatigue and increasing the risk of injury and overreaching and all these negative consequences of training. Whereas they could be on fire that day and got some sleep and whatever, and now they're pushing loads around 85% that are really 80%. And so, being able to adjust the load is a valuable commodity. And autoregulation is basically saying that instead of fitting the load to the athlete, you fit the athlete, instead of fitting the athlete to the load, you fit the load to the athlete. In other words, you're going to change the load for the athlete depending on how they're doing. Now, there's some downsides. Dr. Mann points these out in his book, like you're going to have motivated athletes. So this is not going to be for your junior high team that don't understand what it means to even move fast yet. It's not going to be for those high school athletes that are lazy, right? Or college athletes that are lazy that are just trying to get through a workout and they know if they go slower on purpose, they're going to be done with their sets, right? So on. So again, Dr. Mann's honest with these things. He talks about how they've kind of worked around some of these issues. But just do keep in mind that this is going to be for a method for motivated athletes, not just for, some athletes that are a bunch of slappies that they really don't care, right? Or they're too young to understand the concepts, okay? Now, kids can get excited about these things, but it'd be difficult to do like a 4-week training program for a bunch of junior high kids. It might be percentage basis or rep guidance based type of movement might be a better approach, okay? But if we're talking about optimal, velocity-based training seems to be good. So Dr. Mann pulls in some research literature to support why velocity-based training does match up to percentage-based training, which is important because it gives validity to the idea. He also talks about, the importance of devices, and this is where the limitation also occurs in this method is you have to have a transducer that you trust. And if you have multiple athletes training at one time, you're going to have multiple transducers, so you're going to have some money to do that. Thinking about transducers, thinking about reliability, is the number you're getting from set to set actually correct? So in other words, is it if the athlete's moving at 1 meter per second on set 1 or rep 1 and rep 2, they're moving at 1 meter per second. Is it still showing 1 meter per second, or is there error in the measure? Now it's 1.2 meters per second. You're like, oh, the bar's moving faster. I better put more load on the bar. And it wasn't the athlete. It was there's error in the measurement, right? So you have to buy a good transducer. Validity is a little bit less of a problem, except validity is 1 meters really what it is. Is it actually 1.5 meters per second? But at least the device is reliable. So when the athlete's tiring or it's too easy, it will change its value. Validity says, well, it's not. It's just incorrect. Again, there's different forms of validity. And there's different forms of reliability. I'm just talking in general here. So validity is 1.5 meters per second on the device, but it's really 1.8. And so you think the athlete is struggling. In reality, they've been crushing the load, and so you could have put more weight on the bar. If you understand the error, there's no bias in the error. There's error in the measure in terms of validity. You can make adjustments with the device. I'd rather have a reliable device with this type of training than a valid one, because I can use my eyeball test even, or even if I wanted to get into using a video camera and actually measuring bar velocities to figure out what the difference was and how off the device is. But I want to make sure it's reliable. That's critical, in determining if we can use velocity-based training. You have to have a reliable device to do it. And the eyeball test can work too. I use that as well because I don't have, these devices. I had one and it broke, so I have to use my eyeball test. But that's not as good as actually using a device, okay, no matter how experienced you are. All right, so Dr. Mann has some really nice tables, or a continuum, and he has some tables of his own training, but he has a nice continuum in here about going through like starting strength all the way up to, some of these heavier loading, like maximal strength, and speed strength and strength speed, and the different velocities that correspond to each one of these qualities. And so that's money right there. That's the heart of the book, really. And he talks about how to implement this method then in different formats, whether that's using a set with a no repetitions. It's just all about until the velocity falls off, or it's using a set repetitions, but you must maintain this velocity. And I'm going to increase or decrease the load accordingly. So there's some. He talks more about these things. I'm not going to steal all the content of the book and put it in the video, but it does a really nice job of summarizing how not only what the method is, but how to apply it. Again, that's that value of seeing somebody who's in the academic world, but also as a coach. So it's not just theory. This is how you actually do it. And this is what it looks like. And here's the limitations associated. One of the parts that he does mention, he does use velocity training with the, your typical powerlifting compound movements. He does talk about it in relation to Olympic style weightlifting. I'm personally, this is my disagreement with the book. It's not a big deal. But I wouldn't even use, and Dr. Mann does talk about this, to be fair, using, these transducers of metabar velocity during the full Olympic style weightlifting movements are difficult, just because, as Dr. Mann points out, the technique is an issue. And so I would recommend using more pulls. Pulls are a little easier to teach. You don't have to worry about catching the bar. That's where a lot of bad things happen. It might be better to use just pull, and again, this is mentioned in the book, pulls instead of using the whole movement, just because of technique. But that's my only detraction of the book. The only detractor I would have, the only thing I would say I don't agree with in the book. But even then, it's not a big deal. You could read it and decide, hey, I agree with Dr. Mann. I'm going to use this instead. Dr. Mann is full of crap, and that would be fair. Okay. But the book is a great book. I highly recommend it if you're interested in velocity-based training, or you have athletes that would be motivated to do this, like a private setting, collegiate setting. If you have athletes you don't think would buy into this concept, and you don't have the funds to be able to purchase the transducers and etc., then I would not recommend it. Now, I would still pick the book up and understand the method, because it's going to take over strength conditioning, at least at the highest level that it already has. If you go to these bigger universities in particular, you'll see, or professional teams, you'll see, the power racks with, Xbox Connects in them and things like that, and they're measuring bar velocities. And it's not really about sets and reps anymore. It's not about the percentages. Excuse me. It's still about sets and reps, but it's not about the percentages. It's about the bar velocity. All right. So again, I highly recommend the book with those caveats. It's worth a read though, if you're just interested in the method. It does a nice job of summarizing velocity-based training and also just the general concept of autoregulation.